Almost a year ago to this day, Star Wars Battlefront II received its final content update. It's crazy to think that EA and DICE managed to support a game for that time with nothing but free content updates. They were really on form during their time supporting the game. The community interaction was strong and they were incredibly open about the development process. When the massive Rise of Skywalker update hit in December 2019, it was clear that support was coming to an end. Every previously released cosmetic and unlock was made available to purchase as part of a single definitive edition, the so-named Celebration Edition. Yet to me, the game always felt like it ended too early. There was so much more they could have done with the title. Looking at the game as more of a platform, it was the perfect space to deliver high-quality Star Wars content to support and enhance the property's other media releases. Let's take a look at what could have been in an alternative universe, as well as why things never felt quite as neatly wrapped up as they could have been. Battlefront 2 has had a rocky journey towards release. It wasn't an instant hit. The game was marred with controversy and a series of foolish corporate blunders that meant the game had to undergo a rather large overhaul after its initial release. Battlefront 2's initial reveal trailer was a big success though. The hype for the game was high and it felt like EA and DICE were able to redeem themselves their previous failings with their initial attempt at a Battlefront game. EA's original Star Wars Battlefront wasn't bad per se, but the game was heavily focused on attack and defend game modes and didn't feature a lot of content. The game's map pool was tiny and only featured content that was based on the original trilogy. The DLC produced for the game was surprisingly good however, but the Season Pass model split the community and it meant that many modes and maps were completely dead weeks after release. The new game promised a better DLC model and a wider range of content that spanned all the eras seen in the films. When it finally became clear how the game was going to be initially monetized, the model was blatantly pay to win. It was a clear display of corporate stupidity, a complete out-of-touch decision. Players could pay for the chance to upgrade their abilities that were even more powerful than they are now. You'd have to play for hours and hours to unlock a single hero. Thankfully, due to the controversy, abilities were nerfed at release, and after a few months, they also made all the heroes available to everyone for free. From then on, the developers started listening to the community more directly. Many of the future updates were inspired by common community discussion points. Over the 2 years of post-launch support, the game went from strength to strength, and was slowly beginning to bring back many of its disenfranchised fans. A long-awaited conquest game mode was added called Supremacy. Popular heroes were brought into the game like Anakin Skywalker and General Grievous. Fan favourite units like the Clone Commando were brought into the game, and even more surprisingly, they brought in an updated version of Instant Action, which is an old feature from the original game where you used to be able to play with bots on any map you wished in this kind of simulated battle. However, in truth, the damage had been done. Many players still regarded the game as being nothing more than a pay-to-win venture, despite all the pay-to-win features being removed from the game. When the Celebration Edition was announced, it was clear that DICE would be ending their support for the game before long. After the initial monetization model was scrapped, they sensibly introduced purchasable cosmetic items as a way of supporting the game's development that could also be purchased using in-game currency for those who wanted something to grind towards. However, after the Celebration Edition released, it was announced that all future skins be free to all players, and DICE removed the ability for players to purchase premium currency in-game. A way for EA to monetize the game, it was clear that its development would soon come to an end. It was simply a case of when. That end came about on the 29th of April 2020, with a very heartfelt final message from the developers in the Battle of Scarif update video. A bittersweet message for all as they declared that their vision was finished. In their final update, DICE had finished bringing Supremacy to all the main eras. However, Supremacy was surprisingly missing the capital ship phase for the original trilogy era, and there were certainly a few elements that felt like they were rushed out the door for such a well-polished game. DICE had endeavoured to get as many of their maps working with each of the main modes as possible, but more specifically, working with the modes that had offline bot support. Even the smaller, seemingly unworkable maps, like the sequel trilogy's rather small capital ship interiors, were turned into pretty effective arenas for the game's popular co-op mode. Despite their efforts, there were a few odd exclusions. The popular Bespin map, which was limited only to heroes vs villains and deathmatch, didn't arrive in either Supremacy or co-op, and the long-awaited co-op version of Crate, a map that was designed for attack and defend modes, didn't make the final update either. The most bizarre element for me was the total lack of a capital ship phase for the original trilogy. It's pretty clear from their initial content that they were happy to bend the law for all eras, so the excuse that the Rebellion didn't have the resources or that it wouldn't be fitting for Hoth, Scarif or the Death Star doesn't really add up. It's pretty clear that every Supremacy map in the sequel trilogy required a bit of lore bending or twisting to begin with. Besides, canonically, the Resistance had even less resources than the Rebellion by the end of the second film. It's clear the real answer is there wasn't time, or EA wanted the developers to move on. However, there are so many fun ways the capital ship phase could have been incorporated into the original trilogy maps. Take the Death Star 2 for example. An ISD or Mon Cal cruiser could have made their way close to the Death Star to pick up or block the escape of the rebel cell, trying to sabotage the ship from within. On Scarif, if they wanted to keep things a little closer to the actual lore, they could have been a bit more creative. Rebels could have been charged with sabotaging part of the Imperial base on Scarif, or the Imperials could have tried to reclaim the initial landing pad like on the film. Or, more simply, the entire battle could just take place after the shield gate has been destroyed. Alongside the rushed out supremacy for the original trilogy, there were quite a few other things that were left behind too. The developers were clearly hoping to bring more fan-favourite heroes to the battlefield. Ahsoka had been rumoured for a while, and there had been a promise that the game would see more female heroes after launch. There were also a few odd omissions when it came to cosmetics too. For example, all the droids were given Kamino training skins, except for the Super Battle Droid, which is probably just an oversight, but was certainly odd when every other droid was given something. You can't really blame a publisher for simply cutting the funding for further development when there's little chance for them to make any future return on their investment. But Battlefront 2 could have been so much more if they continued to generate revenue off of cosmetics or other methods. Many other free-to-play games have been very successful in this regard, and if EA and DICE had the experience of developers like Valve or Epic Games in the free-to-play market, I suspect they could have kept the game going for a long time. There's so much content that's ripe for use for player cosmetics in the Star Wars universe, the cosmetic route would have been an almost limitless goldmine. The Solo film, as divisive as it was, did bring in a lot of new Stormtrooper variants that could have been drawn upon for Imperial cosmetics. The Mandalorian equally showed us a lot of old Imperial tech that wasn't seen in the original trilogy, like the Mortar Trooper and the Flame Trooper. EA's other recent Star Wars title, Jedi Fallen Order, also had a host of variations on trooper design that could have been used for inspiration. And that's not even considering all the contributions Star Wars Rebels and the original trilogy could have brought to the table too. And that's just looking at the Imperial side of things. The point is, EA and DICE had a lot they could draw upon to help monetize the game and keep it going for years to come. Perhaps the biggest shame of all is all the Star Wars content this could have funded. With a steady stream of income from monthly cosmetics, time could put into building content that helped fill the gaps and help promote the other Star Wars media being released at the time. I'm sure a Battle for Mandalore map would have been a very popular tie-in with the release of the final season of the Clone Wars last year, and that many players have been very happy to finally have characters like Poe Dameron or Ahsoka be introduced into the game. There's an endless number of planets and heroes that could have been added had support been carried on for longer. Despite the game's multiplayer going through a massive overhaul, one disappointing element still remains, the game's single-player campaign. The campaign isn't bad per se, it's fun to play through and there are some great moments. However, the sting of the cliché story and the almost immediate shift from the Imperial side to the Rebel side has left a bad taste in a lot of players' mouths. Whilst there are some good story moments, as previously mentioned, a lot of the gameplay is just dull and can be quite a slog to get through. I'd probably say the biggest issue is that they didn't understand what made the single player in the original Battlefront so memorable. The game's gameplay wasn't anything different to the multiplayer, but it made you feel like you were part of a huge battle. It made you feel like you're just another regular clone fighting against all odds. Death merely meant you picked the mantle up of another reinforcement. The decision to have no real main character, but rather have you follow the story of a whole platoon, made everything feel so much more alive and real. There's a lot more I could say about the campaign, which I may do in another video, but more importantly for this video's point, the greatest loss of the single-player campaign is how little of it was used or expanded upon in the multiplayer. None of the newly introduced planets were included in the multiplayer, and only Iden was playable. For as much of the game's life cycle as I can remember, the community were begging for such settings as Vardos and Pyleo to be converted into multiplayer maps. Sadly, that never came about. Even the capital ship interiors of the Mon Calamari cruiser or the Imperial Star Destroyer weren't repurposed for the use in Supremacy mode, which is probably the biggest travesty of them all. Without doubt, the game's campaign took up quite a bit of file space and development time, and sadly most of that content remains locked in the single-player campaign. Battlefront 2 though was still probably EA's most successful live service game. However, I don't think that DICE have really managed to create a suitable model to support such a game yet. They were incredibly close with Battlefront 2, but just not quite there. When they moved to the monthly update model around the initial launch of the new Supremacy mode, new content came thick and fast. There's always something to sink your teeth into, but nothing for those who may have spent a lot on the in-game cosmetics. There were a couple of pricey skins that were released over the course of the game's lifespan. However, I struggle to see how a few clone/hero skins would be able to pull in long-term players' cash, especially as most of those in-game cosmetics could easily be purchased with in-game currency. You'd need to grind hard to earn everything, but it was very possible for you to buy the skins you wanted. I don't think this is totally DICE's fault, however. Many of the devs often spoke of the lengthy approval processes that cosmetics had to go through with LucasArts and Disney. And on the community end, a lot of the skins were remade and edited to be more lore accurate. I've no doubt a lot of the artists at DICE had to spend a lot of time, a lot of countless hours, doing and redoing much of their work. There are many titles that have managed to survive on cosmetics alone. However, at the rate new cosmetics were being delivered when it was supported, I don't think Battlefront 2 could have been sustainable. A good model would be to have 10 plus cosmetics during each update, and they'd need to be delivering a lot more high value, high ticket items. In the whole of the game's lifespan, very few of the game's heroes received legendary skins. In fact, very few received skins full stop. Are we going to see further development of Battlefront 2? The honest answer is no. However, it's certainly not out of the question, given the popularity of the game and the continued support of its fan base. I've no doubt that if DICE announced they were going to be renewing their support for the game and there would be an update dropping imminently, hype and discussion around the game would immediately spike. The potential around the franchise is still huge, and DICE are totally aware of that too. Equally, the game in its current state is a chunky 90 plus gigabytes. Sure, you could easily add another 10 to 20 gigabytes to the overall file size, but the likelihood is that something would break on one platform sooner or later. DICE's time is probably best spent working on a new Battlefront game. My secret wish, and it may be a little controversial, is that DICE would make the next Battlefield game with a Star Wars theme. The slightly slower, more team-focused gameplay of Battlefield could be a lot of fun to explore in the Star Wars universe, especially in the context of the Clone Wars or the original trilogy. EA's Star Wars Battlefront II will forever hold a place in my heart. Whilst it wasn't perfect, and it's clear that mismanagement has led to the full potential of the game being rather squandered, what we've been left with is a competent reimagining of the early 2000s classic that remains as fun to play both online and offline since the inclusion of instant action. However, despite the failings of a few poor choices, the game's development team really managed to make the best of a bad situation. I don't think enough praise can be given to how well the developers worked to turn the situation around. The lessons from Battlefront 2 are quite clear, and for the sake of all potential future customers, let's hope they've been heeded. And, whilst the game has always felt a little unfinished and underbaked, what we've been left with is a fantastic game to tide us over until the next instalment.